a developer evangelist at Salesforce, and I'm here today to replace my colleague who couldn't make it. He was supposed to talk about AI, but here today I will talk to you about VR and Salesforce and how we can create empathic customer connections with both technologies. So here's the quick agenda of what we're going to see today. We're going to start by getting rid of some misconceptions about VR. It's a fairly popular topic, just like AI, but there's a lot of false assumptions around this topic. So I'm going to discuss a bit what is involved behind VR, what it requires to develop a VR experience, what kind of tools, what kind of skills are required. Then I will talk about how we integrate VR with Salesforce. What is the connection with Force.com and a VR experience? Later on, I will illustrate this with an actual demonstration of my work, a real use case of what we did with VR and Salesforce, and I will conclude. So first of all, I've listed here 3 big misconceptions we tend to see around in the VR space, for people who don't know what VR is exactly. The first one is VR is only for gaming, it's not for business. So that's actually, this perception is mainly coming from what you see in the news. So we tend to see a lot of news about gaming companies providing games on VR, but there's more in that, and I will talk more into that in the next slides. Second point is that VR costs a fortune, so either the hardware and the software. It's not really the case. I will show you also some figures, but VR can be quite inexpensive actually and easy to access. And lastly, that VR development requires either dark magic or a PhD, which is totally not the case. So I didn't know VR like 8 months ago, and I learned it. I think everybody in the room has enough skill to learn it. There's nothing really tricky about it. It just requires a bit of time. So let's have a look at the VR market and see a bit where we are right now and where it's heading to. So as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of noise in the VR industry. You can see a lot of big companies like Oculus, like Google, but all are releasing headsets. So there's a lot of competition going on right now to access the consumer market, which is rather good because it pulls the prices down. I've collected some figures here, predictions for 2016, which is a bit now outdated, but Deloitte estimated that the market was around $1 billion for 2016. Now, the thing is, a lot of VRs are coming in right now. A lot of competition is driving the cost down, but this is going to get even bigger pretty soon. Digital Capital predicted that for 2020 there will be like 150 billion revenue in the AR and VR world. So just to be clear, AR is augmented reality and VR is virtual reality. AR is actually using real-life images and enriching them with data. And to be totally transparent with you, AR is actually going to get an increasing share of the market. Out of those 150 billion revenue in 2020, AR will make the most of it. So for now, AR is pretty young and it's kind of complex to put in place. VR is easier to access. And these numbers are really going to grow. And I believe in the $150 billion revenue for 2020, there are about a third that will be dedicated to VR alone. So that's $50 billion just for VR. So that's a bit the landscape. Now, what are the business use cases for VR? Why is it not just gaming? Well, one of the fastest, I would say, growing use case for VR, which is business related, is actually exploring remote or dangerous areas. For example, you could visit Mars with just your VR headset. There are some applications on Google that you can travel, for example, the International Space Station. This is not something you could do with regular travel. I mean, there are also some museums that are putting in place virtual space to visit a museum. We have also some exploration of dangerous spaces like a nuclear power plant. Another sector actually, which is actually where VR came from, is training and simulation. VR was actually developed in the 70s by the military, just like any kind of modern technology. Generally comes from the people who get the money, which means the military. So VR came from simulation at first. They tested some weapons with VR systems. But now it's getting common practice to practice surgery, for example, with VR headsets, because you can operate remotely. And this is true also for NASA training. Astronauts do train with VR equipment because the hardware is so expensive and so difficult to get access to. that they do train on VR. And lastly, marketing journey. So this is getting a lot of traction from the industry because it's more than just games. You can have, for example, virtual shops. And with VR, you're able to basically track down what the consumers are looking at. So if you're walking in a shop and you're looking at the virtual items, we can collect some marketing data about where you spent the most time looking at. So this probably indicates what you can buy or not. The screenshot I have here on the slide is actually part of the experience we demoed at latest Dreamforce. This was a way to have a virtual reality experience enriched with customer data. So the customer would basically fill out a simple form, and he will be able to interact with his data inside the VR experience. So that was a really simple demonstration of how we can connect both worlds. And in the example I'm going to show later on, you'll see an even better, deeper connection between the two. So that's the first part, what we can do with VR. Now, is it expensive? Well, the answer actually is no. It can be as inexpensive as £3. So what's the secret behind that? Well, everybody has a phone in the room, I guess, a modern phone. And with £3, $3 or €3, whatever the currency is, you can actually buy a cardboard, or you can even build it yourself. So it's really inexpensive. Of course, that's not the high-end experience, but you can really start doing VR with that. Now, to be a bit more, to go a bit more in depth on this, there are two main categories of hardware. The first one is low cost, so that's a mobile solution. This uses a phone, and it's using a headset, so either the cardboard or something like the Daydream here. For example, this is a Daydream. So this is the Google virtual reality headset. This is the one you see on the picture above, here. This uses just a phone, and you place the phone inside the headset, and you lock it down. So this costs around £3 to £100 or $1. This one is 100. So that's really something you can buy, and it's really easy to set up. It's a great way to discover VR. And then also on the other end, you have also high-end configurations, which require a lot more money and power. So this, in this screenshot, we have the Oculus Rift. The Oculus Rift is around $800, but you need also to have a really powerful PC with a high-end graphics card to run it. So it's around $3,000 or whatever. So these are really two different experiences. One is really easy to get to use, and the other one requires a bit more resources. But for a company, it's really okay to have it. So what does it require now to build a VR experience to really be immersed? To do VR development, you need a game engine. So there are really two main solutions on the market right now. There's either Unity 3D or Unreal Engine. So these are basically tools that help you to write some code and to interact with 3D models and build an application based on that. The one I personally recommend is Unity 3D. This is the one you see in the screenshot here. Why do I recommend it? Well, because it's free if you want to try it for non-commercial use. So it's a really good thing. You can really start to do VR for free, or £3. It's multi-platform. There's a great community, and they have a lot of resources just to keep you started, and also on VR. One thing that's really worth mentioning also here is that they're trying to build a standard VR SDK. Why am I saying this? Well, the problem is VR is a fairly new technology, so it's not yet standardized. That means that every headset provider has its own SDK, so that can be a problem. To build a VR experience which is truly compatible with different headsets, it's a nightmare because everybody uses its own SDK. And Unity is doing something intelligent here. They're trying to get together all the vendors and try to build some common SDK. So this is really an effort worth noting. Now, we've talked about the tools, but what are the skills required to build a VR experience? Well, there are a couple of things you need to know, and some of them you might find obvious, some of them you might not find obvious. The first thing is creativity and patience. You probably know what code is, so code takes a bit of time, but it's pretty straightforward. If you say something, it will do the thing you want it to do. Now, for VR, it's a bit more different because there's a lot of creativity involved. So you may spend a lot of time tweaking, adjusting, going backward, forward. It can take a lot of time. If you compare the time it takes to assemble a movie, for example, each minute of movie, each second of movie, it's like a 10x factor in terms of design, assembly, and everything. Well, VR is even worse than that. I would say it's at least 20x. So it takes a lot of time to produce a little experience. That's why creativity and patience is really key to VR development. Next thing, which is kind of obvious, you need to be able to represent yourself in 3D space. It's not very complicated, but if you have a trouble reading a map, for example, which is only 2D, you may not be the right person to do that. Next thing is mathematics. So this is borrowed on purpose because you don't need to know math to do VR development. That's something the computer does for you. So you don't need to be able to rotate a matrix, you do all this complicated calculation. If you're just using a game engine, the game engine will do the math for you. So it's pretty straightforward. You just need to be basically able to translate coordinates when you move objects, and that's about it. Programming, of course, is mandatory. You cannot do VR development if you don't know how to program. There are a bit of things which are declarative, but you cannot really go far if you don't know how to program. In the case of Unity, it's worth mentioning that you need to know either C# or JS, JavaScript. I didn't know C# when I learned how to do VR, but there's a lot of examples, so it's not very difficult. You can learn it. And lastly, this is probably the most important point, 3D modeling. You do not need to know how to build 3D models when you do VR development. And actually, I would discourage you to do that because it's really a job on its own. Building a nice 3D model is something that can take you days, months to do really something convincing. So that's a different skill set, and that's actually a job to do a 3D model. But fortunately, for every game engine, there's generally an asset store with either resources you can purchase, a 3D models you can purchase, or have for free. So that's really something I would discourage you to try to do, unless you're really an artist, is to go on creating your own 3D models. So for example, if we take this screenshot here, which was from the Dreamforce experience we developed, there are a couple of models here, like for example, power line here, and this is kind of cut, but there's a factory there. So these are models you can purchase on an asset store or have an dedicated artist build for you. And you just manipulate them, you just place them in an environment, and you can interact with them with code. So you don't need to create all the models. And to relate with the creativity, this was the UI we put in place for the Dreamforce experience. Basically, there were some questions, and you needed to stare at the answers to be able to interact with the controls there. So for example, if you wanted to answer to this question, what is the size of the building, you had to stare at one of the options, and the VR headset was able to track your gaze and look at what you were looking at, and if you held your gaze for a couple of seconds, the orange bar would fill up, and that would select your answer. So that's one of the different ways to interact with VR. You don't have a mouse, you don't have a keyboard, you have to think in different terms when you interact with it. Now, that was really the non-technical part of my talk. Now I'm going to get a bit more technical, and I'm going to talk about how we integrate with Salesforce. So what's the relationship between our game engine and the Force.com platform? Well, to do that, we use a connected application on Force.com, and we use an SDK that I built to communicate with REST, but first we have to authenticate with OAuth 2.0. And after that, the code which resides on our Unity application is able to interact with REST APIs. So that's one of the takeaways of this session. I will leave you with the SDK. The tool I built basically does the basic OAuth so that you don't have to deal with the tokens in the password authentication. It allows you to do CRUD operation on any kind of records. So in the applications we develop either for Dreamforce or the other topic I'm going to talk about next, we had a couple of custom records, so we have an API that can support CRUD, create, read, update, delete operations on those records. And then there are a couple of other stuff you can do, remote Apex calls, etc., etc. But really, with simple operation, you can do whatever you want with Salesforce. So this is available on the GitHub repository, and I will leave you with the link in the end of the presentation. And now I will switch actually to the use case, what we've been doing recently with VR, with the Daydream, Google Daydream headset. So to illustrate that, I'm just going to kick in a really small, no, I will not kick it, we don't have time. But I will just go over it and explain actually what, oops, sorry, wrong. All right, this is after, all right. So this was the Shelter project, and actually I'm going to talk over it because we're a bit short on time. I'm going to talk about it with images. Oops, if it will allow me to resume. Yeah. So this was a project we did for the World Economic Forum, and we had a class of students, and we allowed them to create a Salesforce application which would interact with a VR experience. So the purpose of this experience was to help the students reflect on how do we house displaced people, like refugees, for example. To do that, we leveraged a solution which allowed them to configure a recycled shipping container into a house. So they had sets of furniture that they could purchase, and they were able to assemble them in the house, in the container, to create a living space. So we had a set of briefs with some instructions, a budget, and they were able to create all of that. Now, how did we go on building this? Well, first they spent half of the day working on the Salesforce part, the Salesforce data and application. They created a data model, which is here. That's the schema builder view of the data model. They created 4 different custom objects to hold the briefing instructions, the furniture objects. And then they created a Lightning application. So this one is actually the completed application. They didn't go as far as this. But just to give you a bit of overview of how this works, they have on the side a list of stock items that they can purchase. And they have on the right side, on the left side, sorry, the list of items that they have placed in their configuration. They have a budget. They have a limited set of resources, such as power and water, and they need to assemble all of that and respect a given budget. So they could provide different solutions for a given brief. And we're going to see after that, the next step is how did they interact with this data in VR. So this is the time when we do something a bit experimental. I'm going to kick in a video just to show you how this was live. Hopefully, yeah, this works. So what you're looking at right now is a projection of what the player or student was able to access. So they were moving around the pieces of furniture that they have in their original configuration. On the table, it was actually on your left side here. These were the items they placed in the Lightning configuration of the Lightning application. So they were able to pick objects from this table and drag and drop them onto a configuration. And here what we're looking at is the assembly of the different items, the placement in the 3D space of the different elements. This here is kind of a game, but you can imagine the business application coming out of that. You can simulate and arrange an interior design of your house with VR. Instead of moving all pieces of furniture, like if you want to move your bed around, you can simulate basically a new layout. So that's about, I think you get the idea. So they did that, and in the end, they had to present their work. Some of them had come with really interesting solutions to respond to their brief. And but yeah, that's the purpose of the that was called application we did. So I went a bit fast. I'm sorry, I didn't have enough time to prepare my talk, but I'm going to go to conclusion and I will take questions afterwards. So I hope that I had convinced you that VR development is not necessarily too complicated, that it can be really used for business purpose, not just for gaming, although it's quite fun. It's something that is easy to access. I mean, it takes some time, but it doesn't cost much, and it's not something that is black magic again. And you can actually try it out. So to try it out, I'm going to leave you with the resources linked to Unity 3D. And we do have also a Trailhead VR project. I don't know if you guys saw it in the section project of Trailhead. We have a VR project there. This one is fairly declarative. It's not something that uses code. So if you're afraid of code, you can still try it out. And lastly, if you are developers, what is most interesting is my SDK to interact with Salesforce. All right. So I'd like to thank you, and I will now take questions if you have any. Yeah, sure. Actually,
sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, hold on. We need to give you a mic. Yep.
Hello, 1.
Okay, you talked about AR at the start. How much of this is going to be the same for working with AR? Is it just taking a live video feed and adding the controls on the top? It's going to be the same SDK?
So the SDK could be the same, but the thing is, AR is actually not going to use a game engine. Most likely because it's basically using a video feed of the real life environment and doing some computation on top of it. So it's probably not going to be the same development environment than VR is. For now, there is no free SDK to do that. So I guess it's up to people to build solutions on top of that. It's fairly new. But game development is not new. The Unity tool and the Unreal Engine are really old. They have more than 10 years of experience in doing that.
Do you need game programming experience to build VR?
No, I didn't have any game programming experience. I'm a coder, so I have a programming experience, but I don't have any gaming development experience.
And how long did it take to build that project?
So the project here, the one we had for Davos World Economic Forum. Oops, where did? Oops, I closed it, but I'm going to reopen it again. Anyway, yeah, the project we did for Davos required a bit of time because it's a fairly complicated process. It's about 300 hours of work. But that means also I wasn't learning at that time. I already had gained enough knowledge, so I knew what I was doing because I had this previous project before. That's something, again, I want to emphasize on that. It's not terribly complicated, but it requires a lot of learning. So you have to watch a lot of videos, you have to look at forums, you have to discover a bit the world of game engines. It's not, the difficulty is not really in VR itself, it's just to learn how to use the game engine, because the VR component just sits on top, but you have to master the game engine that is below. But the good thing is that there's a really good community and lots of documentation available to do that.
So if you create something like you showed there, what sort of hardware can you sort of distribute it on? Will it compile down to an Android app or an iPhone app that you can put on the App Store and someone else can get for $3?
So actually, the Davos code was running on this headset, and it's running on an Android phone, so it's an Android app. We build an APK, so which is standard Android app.
And Unity will do that for you?
Yeah, exactly. So Unity, that's something I went over a bit quickly. Unity is multi-platform, so it allows you to build on different environments. The editor works on multiple platforms, but the build can also run on multiple platforms. So you select the target build. You can build iOS apps, Android apps. You can also build, well, really complete applications for desktop. You can also build WebGL and applications. That means you can run a VR experience that will work in a browser, although the performance is a bit limited. So there are some constraints.
And that'll work in a mobile browser with something like Cardboard?
It could, yeah. The thing is, it's really difficult when you go to a browser environment because the performance is really not the same compared to a dedicated app.
Can you recommend any headsets for iOS devices?
No, unfortunately not. I don't think I'm not sure if Apple has some plans. For now, the only headset I can think of that is compatible with Apple phones are the Cardboard, so it's not really a good headset. Some manufacturers I know that Samsung said that at some point it will make the Gear VR headset compatible with iPhone, but I don't think they did that yet. For now, it's mainly on the Android scene in terms of mobile VR. Because it's open, I guess it's gaining more traction. So, any other questions? The silent room in silence, I guess. All right. Well, thank you.